In this video, I'm going to be upgrading this mid-2009 13-inch Apple MacBook Pro, or MacBook 5,2, to a 2.8 GHz Intel Core 2 Duo CPU. Now, I'm going to be getting this CPU off of a dead MacBook Pro logic board that I've been using as a donor board for other machines. And in theory, after soldering it onto this board, it should work just fine. So the machine we're going to be pulling it from has an NVIDIA MCP79 chipset, which is the same chipset that this machine has. And you can tell that by the graphics, which are the GeForce 9400M graphics, and also it will tell you under the serial ATA section in the system profiler here. So this machine does have an MCP79 chipset, which in theory means it's compatible with any CPU that's also compatible with the MCP79 chipset. And the 15-inch MacBook Pro logic board we're going to be taking this from is a mid-2009 MacBook Pro, also with the MCP79 chipset. So in theory, this process should work just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and get the donor logic board on my board preheater setup, and then we'll begin the process of removing the 2.8 GHz Intel Core 2 Duo CPU from that board. So I'm going to go ahead and put my camera in the tripod, and we'll begin that process. Alright, so as you can see, I have our donor logic board up here on my workbench here. So here is the CPU we are going to be using. As you can see here, this is a 2.8 GHz Intel Core 2 Duo T9600, and that is definitely going to be quite the upgrade over the original Core 2 Duo P7450, which is a 2.13 GHz processor with 3 megabytes of L2 cache. This is, like I said, a 2.8 GHz CPU with 6 megabytes of L2 cache. So, in theory, if this does indeed work on the MacBook 5,2 logic board, which it should, it's the same front-side bus speed and same architecture, Penguin, and it has the same chipset as the MacBook 5,2, like I mentioned. So, what we're going to go ahead and do now is begin by removing these little pieces of adhesive on the corners of the chip, and then from there, we can go ahead and remove it. So I'm going to go ahead and put my camera in the tripod, and we will begin removing these little bits of adhesive. Alright, so we're now ready to begin removing the adhesive around the perimeter of the CPU. So to do that, we're just going to use the hot air here, and heat up the pieces of adhesive and then remove them with a pair of tweezers. Go ahead and turn on my hot air station, and then we'll be able to begin heating up the little pieces of adhesive and removing them. Alright, so as you can see, I got all those little pieces of adhesive off. So now what we can go ahead and do is set up the board set the board on the board preheater and prepare to remove the chip. So I'm going to go ahead and get the board preheater ready and resume the video. Alright, so now that the board preheater has finished heating up, the first thing we need to do, of course, is to apply some flux to the perimeter of the chip. So go ahead and start doing that now. Alright, and that should be about enough flux there. So now what we're going to go ahead and do is position the hot air nozzle over the chip and begin heating and removing it. Alright, so that looks pretty well positioned there. So now we'll just go ahead and turn on the hot air. Alright, so the chip is now ready to be removed, so I'm going to go ahead and remove the hot air nozzle and then pick up the chip with the tweezers. So let's go ahead and do it. And there we have it, the chip is now removed. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the hot air now. And now the next step is to clear off all the original solder off the chip and then reball it. So I'm going to go ahead and get that ready and resume the video. Alright, so as you can see, we are now ready to remove the residual solder from the chip. So just go ahead and place the chip into my jig here. Like so. And then apply a little bit of extra flux. Just like that. And then we can go ahead and begin removing the residual solder. Now the way I'm going to do this is I'm just going to apply some extra solder, and that will make a little solder ball and allow us to just wipe up all the solder just like this. Alright, now with that done, we can begin using the solder wick to get all of the solder off. Alright, and that looks about good. So now with all the residual solder removed, we can go ahead and clean the chip off and then prepare to reball it. So I'm going to go ahead and clean it off and then go ahead and resume the video. Alright, so as you can see, we have now gotten the CPU in the stencil here. So now the next thing, of course, we're going to do is apply some solder balls to it. Let's go ahead and open these solder balls here and just pour them on top of the stencil. Alright, and that looks to be about good. So now, of course, we'll just make sure each solder ball is in the respective hole. So I think the best way to do that. Alright, and that looks pretty darn good, so we'll just take these solder balls and put them in the holes here. Alright, so all the solder balls are now in place, so now we can go ahead and heat them up and let them melt into their holes. Alright, so now that they've melted a little bit, now what we're going to go ahead and do is put a little bit more flux on top of the stencil and then heat it up again. Alright, that should be about good. So now we'll go ahead and heat it up one more time. Alright, so that looks about good. So now we'll just wait till that cools down and remove the stencil. Alright, and that looks perfect. So now what we're going to do is we're going to heat it up with the hot air one more time with the stencil not on it, and then it will be finished. Alright, so there we go. The chip has now been successfully reballed, And now we will be able to solder it onto the MacBook 5,2 logic board. Now I'm going to go ahead and disassemble the MacBook 5,2 and remove its logic board, and then we will begin the process of removing the original 2.13 GHz CPU. So I'm going to go ahead and get that disassembled and resume the video. Alright, so as you can see here, I've got the MacBook 5,2 board out and ready to work on it. So the first thing we're going to do is remove these adhesive things, just like we did with the new CPU. So I'll go ahead and get my hot air station warming up, and we'll go ahead and do that. Alright, so as you can see, we got all of those off. So now we just have to put the board on the board preheater and begin to remove the chip. So I'll go ahead and resume the video. Alright, so as you can see, I've gotten the board preheater ready. So now we'll go ahead and take our flux here and put it around the perimeter of the chip. Alright, so now that we've gotten our flux applied, we're going to go ahead and align the hot air nozzle over top of the chip. And with that aligned, we will now begin heating it and removing it from the board. Alright, so the chip is now ready to come off the board. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the hot air nozzle and remove the chip. So here we go. And there we go, the chip has been removed. So now what we can do is wait till this board cools down a little bit, and then we can go ahead and begin removing all the residual solder from it and prepare to solder the new CPU on. Alright, so now that the board has been removed from the board preheater, we can now begin the process of removing all of the residual solder. And this will of course be the exact same process as removing it from the CPU. Just take the soldering iron and add some extra solder. Alright, and that looks good, so now what we can go ahead and do is go over it with the solder wick, just like we did before. Go ahead and get the solder wick out here. Alright, and that looks just about good. So now what I'll go ahead and do is just clean up all this old flux, and then we'll be able to solder the new CPU onto the board. So I'll go ahead and clean up this flux, and then go ahead and resume the video. Alright, so now that the board preheater is heated up, now what we can do is just apply a little bit of flux to the pads here. Just like so, and then we'll just take a piece of paper towel and wipe the excess away. Just make sure every pad has a little bit of flux on it. And it looks to, so now what we can do is take our new Core 2 Duo CPU and place it onto the chip, or onto the board. Alright, so there we go, and of course the next thing we need to do is align it. And it looks pretty close to being aligned already, actually. Alright, and that looks just about perfect. So now we'll just align the hot air nozzle and begin flowing the chip onto the board. Alright, so that looks about good there. So now what we'll go ahead and do is just turn on the hot air and solder the chip on. Alright, so it looks like the chip has been successfully soldered onto the board. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the hot air here and then let the board cool down. Alright, so it's been a little bit since the last clip of this video that I took. However, what ended up happening was the original CPU I was putting on this board, the Core 2 Duo T9600, actually broke. It popcorn because I guess I heated it a little bit too much. So now it didn't work, of course, when I tested it. However, I have redone this entire process a second time, but this time using a Core 2 Duo T9400, which is a 2.53 gigahertz Intel Core 2 Duo CPU, and it indeed works perfectly fine. So I'm going to go ahead and power on this machine. The CPU is now installed. Actually, I'll go ahead and lift this up so you can sort of see it. I put some thermal paste on here so it wouldn't get too hot when I was testing it. But go ahead and take a look there. That is a Core 2 Duo T9400, and as you can see there, it's a 2.53 gigahertz CPU with 6 megabytes of L2 cache. So I'm going to go ahead and put this heatsink back on, just like that. It's not screwed in, but it's got enough thermal paste on there that it won't overheat or anything while it's on. So now what we're going to do is just turn on the system and show you that it works. So I'm going to use my tweezers here. And the system's on. And look at that. It is running with the T50 or the T9400 CPU installed. I'm just going to go ahead and wait here and boot off of my hard disk. So I'm going to go ahead and let this thing boot up and then go ahead and resume the video. Alright, so as you can see, the machine has finished booting here, and look at that. It reports it as a 2.53 gigahertz Intel Core 2 Duo CPU. Let's go ahead and open System Profiler here, and look at that, 2.53 gigahertz Intel Core 2 Duo. So that indeed makes this machine the fastest Core 2 Duo 13-inch MacBook in existence right now, because I believe the fastest one before this, or the fastest one of any Core 2 Duo 13-inch laptop, was the 2.4 gigahertz MacBook 4,1. So this being a 2.53 gigahertz MacBook 5,2 means that A, you can run up to high Sierra on this machine using my tool, and it is now one of the only, or probably the only, MacBook 5,2 that is faster than 2.13 gigahertz. So that has been the upgrade of this MacBook 5,2 to a 2.53 gigahertz Intel Core 2 Duo CPU. So, hope you enjoyed this video.